Sometimes it's just us getting out of the way and just letting them kind of figure things out.
On today's podcast, we are covering the dreaded teenage years. Dum, dum, dum. Erin, would you please share with our audience just how you've really struggled during the teenage years? Both personally and as a parent.
Yeah, during my teenage years?
No, I joke because this is often how we characterize it, right? Mm-hmm. The young adult years, the teenage years, we're talking, anywhere from 13-ish to 18-ish. They kind of get a bad rap. Mm-hmm. And sometimes for good reason. Sometimes they're very difficult.
Sometimes for very, very good reason.
Yeah, and we wouldn't say that it's been all smooth sailing for us as well. We've had our ups and downs, but I would say I would not characterize the recent teenage years, because we're kind of in the midst of it. We have a 13, an 18, and a 19-year-old. And having those young adults in our home, it hasn't been this dreaded period. It hasn't been a lot of difficulty. Now, I think it's important to bring this up, this issue where there's a lot of dread or angst or frustration with teenagers in general, or that's kind of the narrative. To pull back and to say, hey, this is why it's important to establish things very early on. Because if you discipline well, in fact, I hope parents of young children are going to listen to this one and not skip over this and say, oh no, teenage years, that's 12, 13 years away. So I don't really want to, or don't have to think about that right now. No, I think it's good to get that larger framework, think about the younger years, think about the middle years, think about the older years, all together as this whole picture. What you do at the beginning lays a huge foundation that can actually make the teen years pleasant.
Joyful.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
You're supposed to go with another adjective there, honey. I thought we had something going.
You wanted to keep going.
Amazing. No, it can be a really good,
it can be
satisfying
fun.
time.
Yeah. Fun in like the true sense of like, it's enjoyable to, I think we would say, even through the hard times and in different situations. And yeah, with now 4 of our 5 kids, either in the teen years or out of them, that it's been enjoyable. We get joy out of seeing our kids get older and become adults
and mature and have some success and prosper and flourish. Mm-hmm. So I guess I want to just change up the narrative a little bit when it comes to quote unquote teenagers, which by the way is not a term that we love. We don't like that term. We often stay away from that term. We've kind of used it in a lighthearted way to say kind of teenage. The word teenage or teenager those are bad words in our home, because often when you think of teenager, your expectations go down based upon the cultural expectations. Mm-hmm. And so we often try to refer to our kids, not as teens, but as young adults, just to say, hey, this is one small little thing to like raise the bar.
Yeah.
But often we have this just negative perception. We have low expectations. We dread the teenage years. And maybe at the beginning of this podcast, it's just good to say, no, actually, maybe it's possible that there's a better vision of this. Mm-hmm. But it's going to take doing some really intentional parenting, really just intentional training in righteousness, intentional discipline, to get to a point where then, yeah, you can have joy watching your teenagers kind of grow and mature. So
yeah, I think, and I just want to say, I think that's in the church and out of the church, that teens, it's kind of like this dreaded age. Who would want to deal with these people? I'm even thinking about when we when you were a full-time youth pastor in a church, at different churches that we were at, and just like, oh, you like to be with teenagers, oh, we don't really. And so there is just, this negative to it. And then that can come into parenting. Now, sometimes for good reason, because this stage can be difficult. And in a lot of ways it is difficult, because now it's a transition stage, right? Like, this is the stage right before they go out to adulthood. And then we stop having authority in their life, and, and they're making decisions on their own. So, these steps you take through the teen years are really kind of the sending off. And so it can be heart-wrenching too, because, I've experienced this, of just the heart-wrenching nature of them growing up and leaving. It is hard, because you've poured so much into them, and so it can be difficult. So,
and that's difficult in a different kind of sense.
Yeah.
Like, you're preparing them to go off.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, as mom, that just with your nurturing instincts, that's a difficult process.
Yeah, because you want to keep them close.
Yeah.
That's
but the process doesn't always have to be tumultuous.
Right.
And that's what we're saying.
Yeah. And there can be joy in, like what we said, as a mom, seeing your kids, do some of the habits, like what we've talked about in the younger stages. And because discipline is a full picture of the child, not just punishment or correction or whatever, but if the full picture of discipline, but to see them affected by the discipline, the habits that you've poured into them, that's where the joy is. And then, of course, there's fear and heartache in habits they haven't picked up, or, just legitimate fears of, like, are they ready for life outside the home? These are the years where all of that's going on, at least in me as a parent. But I think,
well, and this maybe goes back to some of our conversation on gender, right? And the differences between males and females, men and women. And this is why moms and dads are good for each other. Whereas as a dad, there's a sense of advancing, pushing forward, and wanting to say, yeah, I know you're not completely ready for it, and you're going to learn a ton out there just by experience. So, like, go, and wanting to see that. Where you can do that. I could do that as a dad too much, too early. And then, that's when mom is so great in balancing me out and saying, no, they're not ready to go live on their own when they're 11 years old, right? We had that discussion just recently. We were just thinking, how quickly can we get the 9-year-old out of the house? So, no, I'm just kidding. Okay, so let's see here. You wanted to maybe read the passage in Proverbs as an encouragement.
Yeah.
Which Proverbs has just a lot of encouragement for parents, just a lot of wisdom in general for parenting. Mm-hmm. But Proverbs 19:18. Yeah.
And I think the Proverbs are a good place for parents just to live on a regular basis, because it offers so much wisdom. And I just my own personal journey was when our oldest daughter was just starting in the teen years, and I was really struggling with anxiety over it. And I heard a teacher talk about the discipline of reading a Proverbs every day, because there's 31, so you could read one day and just keep doing that. And so that was, almost 10 years, no, more than 10 years ago. And for several years in a row, I just had that discipline. And so the Proverbs are just a good reminder of what's wise to do as a parent. And it's comforting too. And, there's just so much to it. So this proverb, Proverbs 19:18, I think is a good framework for the teen years. And as we start talking through that, and it says, Discipline your son while there's still hope. And I think that's how I want to frame this conversation. And especially in light of, if you're listening, you have older kids and you listen to some of the stuff we talked about doing when they're younger, inevitably there's stuff we all didn't do, right? And when your kids get to a certain age, you're like, oh, darn, I didn't do this well, or I didn't teach them this habit. So just an encouragement from Proverbs 19. While our kids are still in our home, under our authority, needing us financially, emotionally, all of that there's still hope, that you still can instill things in them, that you still have authority to speak into them, and that you shouldn't give up hope. If you're really struggling with your 16-year-old, there's still hope. They're still at home. You still have a voice in their life, and God still wants you to be an authority for them.
Yeah, that's a good word. And we actually should continue reading the rest of that verse. Not only to discipline your son while there is hope, and do not desire his death. That's a great word of encouragement. I think that's wise. Mm-hmm. Don't desire the death of your children. No, I think what he's saying there is,
you better unpack that.
that disciplining your child and kind of setting them on the right path is, and doing it while you still have them, while there's still hope. Discipline actually sets them on the right path so that they don't take a path of destruction. Yeah. Right. And Scripture talks about that. Yeah. Wide is the gate that leads to destruction. So discipline, and again, thinking long term, discipline, even though it can be tough, you've got this long term vision for your kid, and so you just keep plugging away, being faithful. So all right, so now we got these young adult years that we're trying to shift, do a little bit of a shifting here. Mm-hmm. You've got the foundation. Those younger years, it's a lot of just the what. There's appropriate consequences.
Focus on obedience.
Focus on obedience. Mm-hmm. Focus on training the will, and having the will conditioned to submit in a healthy way ultimately to God is the idea. Because we all have to submit to somebody, whether it's a boss or to the Lord or whatever. There's so many situations in life where you have to submit. And so you will have a difficult time in life if you don't learn how to submit to different authorities in our lives. And so those younger years. The middle years then are adding the why, giving the reasoning now. Mm-hmm. And now in these young adult years, as our kids are able to think more abstractly, what we want to do is help them to develop self-discipline, self-rule. This is where now, eventually, we want to get them to the point where they have internalized this stuff and it becomes part of their own thinking. They take ownership of these principles. We want them, I think Psalms 1 is a really good vision for our kid, where it's not just, I have to obey, I have to do this because mom and dad said so, but instead it's Psalm 1 where it says, his delight is in the law of the Lord. I mean, that's where we want our kids to be. That's where we want to be, where we delight, like, the psalmist here, in God's laws. Mm-hmm. I think just pause there for a second. That's a different picture than, in a different way to think about obedience. Mm-hmm. A lot of times we think about obedience in terms of obligation, but no, obedience can be something we delight in, because we delight in God's law, because God is good by his very nature, and therefore his laws are good. And so we want to get our kids to a point where they see that, they understand that, and then now they're also living it out, experiencing, flourishing for themselves. And so, the foundation of taking ownership begins in that earlier stage. It begins in stage 2 when you're giving the reasons. And that is, I think, just a primary way to help take ownership of things, whether it's their faith or whether it's it's their moral development, is always having reasons why. God is a reasonable God. He's a rational God. So this is why the reasoning part of stage 2, those middle years, is so important. You're going to continue to do that in the teenagers. You're going to continue to have those conversations about why we do these things. But there's a little bit of moving towards now, not just some of the cause and effect, but now moral principles. Moral principles that, of course, in the Christian worldview are grounded in the very nature of God. And so connecting back to God's character, the laws that he gives. And, God is just, God is holy, and looking at the attributes of God and seeing his nature as such, and then connecting that with what it means to be human identity, and therefore we're designed creatures, designed to function in a certain way and live in a certain way, live in obedience to our Creator. And so there's these deeper moral principles that are true, that are objectively true, whether we believe them or not, whether we affirm them or not, whether we follow them or not, that we want our young people to ultimately embrace and own for themselves. So that now, as you said, Erin, as we're looking at them moving out of our house, sending them out into the world, now this stuff is internalized. And so that's kind of the goal here. And there's some key things that we need to do in this stage. So what are those? Because
let me list them real fast. Well, I think, I think starting with thinking of maybe some boundaries or rule. I don't know how we want to say it, but I think one.
These are things. These are practical steps to help facilitate this at this stage.
Yeah, the flourishing, the walking alongside them, the helping them to connect reasons with what they do, thinking logically through decisions, these sorts of things.
This is where there will be more dialogue.
Yes.
So you're not dialoguing with a 3-year-old because of the stage they're at. But now these teenagers, there's a lot. I mean, we've had a lot of
exhausting dialogue.
Late night, kid comes in. We're like getting ready for bed. We're in bed, ready to go to sleep. And a kid plops onto the bed and says, "Oh, can I talk to you about something?"
Or just starts talking about something.
Or just
where I've literally had to hold my eyelids open so that I can listen and stay awake. Yes, teens are known for liking to stay up late, and it's typically, we have seen in like all 4 out of the 5 now, it's in the later evenings that they are relaxing, and then that's when the dialogue typically happens.
Yeah. But point is, this is where there's a lot of conversation,
Yes.
a lot of dialogue, a lot of explaining. This is a challenging stage for parents because this is going to test how well you know your stuff, how well you've internalized moral principles, how well you can articulate the Christian worldview, really. And so this is where sometimes some humility is needed as parents. And when our kids ask us stuff or we're trying to explain stuff, we might say, we got to be honest. I haven't thought through this as well, and I need to. And that humility is really important at this stage.
Which leads to the first thing we were going to talk about, which is that at this stage, mutual respect is really required. Because they're moving towards the adult stage. They're moving towards a more mature relationship with us. But that respect that we, hopefully nurtured when they were young is still very vital in these years. And it's mutual respect. So when there needs to be a dialogue, we listen to them and we respect their thoughts and ideas and we listen. But then in any healthy relationship, there has to be a mutual respect to where then they also listen to us. And I just think that this is an important boundary to have. And especially, I would say, to the mothers who are listening, it might be the fathers too, but especially moms, I have seen in this stage a lot of tolerance for rudeness and sassiness, condescension, just frustration that just gets taken out on mom. And there's not a mutual respect of mom is a human being who has, in 99% of situations, poured her life into you. And so she deserves to at least be treated like a dignified human being that she is. So this idea of mutual respect, even though they're growing and getting older, I think it needs to be a value that you hold as a family.
Yeah, and that's something I think to narrate the why behind is important. And of course, it's grounded in our Christian worldview. It's grounded in the idea that we are all image bearers. Mm-hmm. We're all made in the image of God, and there's this intrinsic dignity and worth that we have. And so how do you treat someone who's made in the image of God?
Yeah.
It's not an unconditional respect where I'm going to respect or I'm going to allow you to kind of do whatever. Mm-hmm. I guess I don't. Maybe the terminology isn't correct. Unconditional. It's not an unconditional respect. But the idea, what I'm trying to communicate here, is that you don't have to let your kid disrespect you. You can call them on that.
Yeah, you shouldn't.
Yeah, and now there are two things here. Mm-hmm. One, it could be that it ends up revealing that it's not mutual in that you are not respecting your kid, or maybe you're being sassy with your kid. That's a mom term, sassy. Yeah. You're just being rude to your kid. Mm-hmm. And so, that's where a teenager, a young adult, can sometimes, God can use them to humble us. Mm-hmm. They reflect back to us. Well, Mom, this is how you talk to me, kind of thing. So we've got to be open and humble to that feedback.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not, though. You treat them with respect. And then what's happened is they've been socialized by the culture around them. They've been socialized by their parents. Not their parents. They've been socialized by their peer group to be disrespectful. We've seen that as well. So, but narrating for them, hey, look, I treat you with respect. And obviously that's going to have to be true, but I treat you with respect. I don't speak to you that way. And so therefore, I'm not going to allow you to do that either. Mm-hmm. And so...
Yeah, the modeling, I think, is important in the humility, like you said. And I know that our kids have at times had to say to me, are you frustrated at me? Because you're talking like you're really frustrated. And they didn't do anything for me to be frustrated at. So I've had to apologize. So it is, if you're gonna have these high standards for them, you have to model it and live up to it, which doesn't mean perfection, but it does mean humility.
Yeah.
And it does mean repentance.
Yeah. And the mutual respect creates a really good environment.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, more maybe the larger general principle is that you constantly have to build good relationships with your kids. So this is an aspect of building that good relationship, and that loving, warm relationship ends up being a really good context where they're more teachable, they're more open.
Yeah. Which I think leads to our next one, which in the teen years, thinking about discipline and what that looks like, I think we would say that the next point would be to prioritize relationship building with them. So this respect has to be nurtured, and it's through time together. And sometimes in these years, you can definitely feel your children pushing you away. Or, and I don't even mean that in a negative sense. Sometimes it's just like they want to start making some decisions, or they don't want to be told exactly how to go about doing something, or whatever the scenario is. So some of it is a healthy pushing away of like, I think I can do this.
This is why it's so important, I think, to realize in your parenting that the end goal is to send them out.
Yeah.
Like you want to send out a mature, healthy adult.
Yeah.
So that you realize, the pushing away is sometimes not just a pushing away as much as it's a trying to gain some kind of healthy independence.
Yeah, it's like a stepping out.
Yeah.
And I think, I say pushing away. And I think I have struggled in these seasons with our kids of not taking personally sometimes when they're just stepping out and it's okay. And I actually, when I sit down and think about it, I actually want that. Yeah. But it can feel like a pushing away sometimes.
And of course, there is sometimes when it's an unhealthy pushing away.
Right, totally.
Right. It's like the junior high kid or the high school kid who've been socialized by their peer group to think, oh, my parents are idiots.
Parents are dumb.
So that's need unhealthy.
Your parents anymore. Yeah. So that's what requires wisdom. And again, this is where the Lord can help us in that. But I think our goal in this point is to prioritize relationship building. So that means you continue to spend time with your child.
Like what do you mean spend time with them? Like what does that look like? Because let's get really practical. That's easy to say, but what does that look like? So
these are the years that our kids are now going to have more commitments at school. They'll be on sports teams. And these sport teams are going to step up their commitments that they want from our kids compared to when they're in elementary school or whatever. And they'll hopefully get a job outside of the home. In the teen years, this is where they really do start kind of establishing a life, in a small sense that is a little bit separate from us. And so what we mean by this is prioritizing relationships. So continuing to spend time together, even though they have other stuff going on, not just saying, well, it seems like they want to do other things, so I'm not going to keep pursuing them. So pursue your teen.
And so practically that could be the family vacations that are scheduled, in the summer or throughout the year, or the weekend getaways. Like, be intentional, block those times out, get your calendar out and plan months in advance and make sure those getaways are happening. Yeah. It can also be weekly times where it's, all right, you take one of the kids out and go have a little date, a little lunch date, a little coffee date, or whatever. It could be, hey, mom's got to run to the store or dad's got to run to the store. All right, grab a kid and have them go with you. For my job, I do a lot of traveling. And so I'm on the road a lot. And so we have intentionally planned out times when one kid is going to go with me on those trips. So those are I think some just really practical ways, but blocking those things out on the calendar, monitoring your calendar. Yeah.
And making that a part of the culture. Cause I could just hear someone saying, what if they don't want to? What if you say, let's go to coffee and I don't want to. Well, if you've kind of nurtured this again from the younger years, then it just becomes going to lunch with mom is just kind of what you do sometimes, and going with dad on trips is kind of what you do or whatever. And so it is harder when they're 16, if you haven't done this, to say, hey, we're going to let's do lunch together every week. It's going to be harder and they might not feel like they want to. I would still say push through that because you need to. And that's what we mean. Pursue them. Even sometimes if it feels like they don't want to, don't take that personally and just push through that. And maybe it's especially if they're reluctant, maybe it's doing something they really enjoy. Like, some of our kids enjoy going to a movie more than going to do something active and vice versa. So maybe it's really thinking about what they want to do, but the purpose of it is to connect with them.
Yeah. One thing that's been helpful, I think, probably for our family is, as we're talking about this, and I'm just trying to think of, okay, how best to do this. But one thing that's been helpful is having a common interest or a common activity. And so I surf, and I've gotten I've taught the kids how to surf through the years, and we've done a lot of family beach time at, all of us. And so that's kind of become this common interest, so that when we say to the kids, like, hey, tomorrow's a beach day, we're going to go surf together. Our kids don't go, oh gosh, I don't want to do that. No, that they all love that. And it's something we've done as a family, and that's become part of our family culture. And so that's this activity that we're all kind of involved with. And so then it creates this natural time to go spend time together. And then that just.
Yeah. And I know families that they do bike rides together a lot. And we know families that run together and
Or camp together.
love camping. Or we know families that do a weekly movie night as a family, and they take turns picking a movie. So it's this sort of thing where, you're nurturing doing stuff together, and that's just a normal thing. So even as they get older, that's still, it's just a part of the culture. And so even though they'll start to have conflict schedule wise, you're still valuing that as an important part of your relationship with your teen.
Yeah. And so this next point relates to that,
Yeah.
where it's maintain healthy limits. So that's where the sports, the school activities, the music lessons, even good things, they can impinge, and modern life is so busy that it can just push out any of this kind of room for healthy relationship building. So you've got to put limits on outside activities so that there is time for family. Put limits on technology so that when you do have that time together, your young people aren't on their phone, right? And taking away from that. Yeah. And so you've got to continue to maintain healthy limits on those kinds of things.
Yeah, technology is a huge blocker in relationship building. And so you just having boundaries on that is going to be vital in nurturing your relationship with your teen, and saying no to too many activities is also, if you are out every night of the week, you're never eating meals together. By the time your teen gets home in the evening, they have homework, and there's just never time to sit and talk.
Yeah. And that's where, and this would be another conversation. This might actually be another good podcast, is thinking about sports. Because sports, I think in the US can really, it can be a good thing. I think there's some really good things about sports, and I've played sports all my life, but it can also become an idol, and it can be very early on where it just dominates the life of a family and then crowds out other good things.
Yeah.
So
having healthy limits on outside of the home.
What I think sometimes happens with those is that we get socialized to that, because it's like, oh, well, all these other families I know, well, their kids are involved in this club sport, and they're doing this and they're doing this. And so we just get carried away, carried along with that cultural momentum. So that's just something you got to sit back and evaluate. Like, why am I feeling the pressure to make sure that my kid is playing, club soccer every single season with no breaks in between, kind of thing. Which also then I think leads to the next point, which is making sure that we are watching not only our own socialization in the culture that we live in, but we're watching the socialization of our kids. What do we mean by this? Well, a lot of young people, they spend really an inordinate amount of time with their peers. And of course, peer relationships are important and they're good. They can be good. But when you spend so much time with the peer group, it can then shape you. And it's funny because a lot of times the socialization kind of objection is launched at homeschool parents, and it's certainly a consideration. But we have to realize that every single kid is being socialized by whatever environment they're in. And so a young person that is spending so much time around their peer group, the danger in that is that they're part of this peer group who are also being socialized by other peers and pop culture. Well, what's the view of parents that they start to absorb and are socialized by? And often it's an unhealthy pushing away. Parents are lame. Parents put limits on our fun. Parents, get in the way of the things that I want to do. Yeah. And so they're socialized to push away, and then this can end up undermining our teaching and training and discipling and disciplining of our kids.
Yeah, I just think about most popular TV shows and movies. You know, we see this all the time. We watch stuff with our kids. It's the prevalent message about parents is that they're dumb, they're not really needed, and your friends are way more valuable and
probably know more and have more wisdom than the parents.
Yeah,
right?
of course. Your 15-year-old friend is way more wise than your mother or father could be. Yeah, and so this message is coming from a lot of different areas. And so, yeah, being aware of what our kids are socialized to, I think is something that, yeah, I don't think about unless I really am confronted, like what you're saying, to think about, oh yeah, how are they being socialized to view us as their parents, us as their family.
Yeah, and then they end up overvaluing the peer relationships and the values of the peers, which can often just come in conflict with what we're trying to do as parents. Mm-hmm. And so this is why you have to monitor that. You have to put limits on it. I mean, if your kid is not only at school 8 to 2 every day of the week, and then maybe a couple more hours of sports practice, and then comes home for dinner, but then is out with their friends again,
or in their room on their phone with their friends.
Yeah, or on social media constantly. This is where we just have to constantly monitor. Mm-hmm. And there are times when you've got to be the parent and pull them back and say, mm-hmm. hey, we're going to kind of pull ourselves out of this. And just to narrate for them things like, well, hey, you seem to really value what these kids say. They're a freshman in high school, but getting them to think, are these, number one, are these the friends that you're going to have all throughout high school? Are their views, that important? Because there's so much kind of shifting in and out of different relationships, and just helping them to, I guess what I'm trying to get at is helping them not to, I guess, to put it in proper perspective. You overvalue these relationships. You know what? It's likely that maybe in a year or two, by the time you're done with high school, this person isn't really going to be your friend anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, how many relationships do you go through in high school?
Yeah, I remember talking to one of our girls about that very thing, and she was, I think, a sophomore in high school at this point. But I said, just think about how much you've changed since 8th grade. And I said, think about your friends then, what really mattered to you, even what your favorite thing was to do or whatever. Think about how much you've changed in 2 years, and reflecting, and then say, don't you think in 2 years from now, you might possibly, those friends might change, whatever, and you might change, and just helping them to see, oh yeah, something they can see with their own eyes is, oh yeah, I've changed. My friends have changed. People I thought would always be my friend aren't now. Things like that, I think, is a good exercise to do with them, that even they can discover. It's not just us telling them, hey, you're going to change. It's like, have you seen how you've changed?
Yeah. And guess what? Mom and dad are going to be here.
Yeah.
Through all of that. We're going to be the steady ones.
Yeah.
I think here would be another very practical thing. And I think this goes along with the idea that we talk about a lot of narrating stuff for our kids, right? Kind of telling them the story as we go along, explaining them, helping them to pull back and see what we're doing, but really communicating to them that the goal of our discipline or instruction or limits or boundaries, all of that is their ultimate good. Mm-hmm. It's their happiness in the deep kind of ancient sense, the idea of flourishing, not just, hey, whatever's pleasurable, whatever desire you have, we want to satisfy. No, there's this good that we have in view, this idea of your flourishing that's filled with joy and love and peace and patience and kindness and all the fruits of the Spirit, and constantly painting that picture that really communicates, hey, maybe you're feeling like I'm against you, but I'm actually for you. Mm-hmm. I'm for your good though. And as a parent, my job as one who is wiser and older and has a better perspective on life is to help get you there. And so just constantly letting them know, whether they necessarily agree with it or not, but just regularly putting into their mind that, hey, this is for your good. And yeah, I know you might not like it, but this is how I see it's related to your good. And just constantly narrating that for our kids.
Yeah. And I think too, this is again where we can pull out examples that they can see with their own eyes and help them to see maybe and this is the narrating part, right, that you're talking about. But so for example, like with one of our children, we had a conversation with them about, do you notice that when you spend time with your friends who encourage you towards what's good, that you are actually happier? Have you noticed that? And we had this conversation with them. And then do you notice when you spend time with friends who aren't really pursuing what's good, do you notice how that changes you? Because we notice it. Do you notice it? Because it seems so evident to us, right? So we're pulling out an example just, from their own life.
They're actually experiencing it, even though they might not recognize that they're experiencing it. So that's the narrating part for them.
Yeah. And that's where, again, we can say, see, we want your good, and we can see that it actually makes you a more joyful person when you're doing what's good. I'm thinking of another example too, where we caught one of our kids in kind of a web of lies. And
can we name that kid? Because sometimes I'm a big believer in public shame as a deterrent against bad behavior.
We will not name this child.
All right, next time.
And so obviously, there was some consequences for the lying, and it wasn't a conversation at that time where we were having to dole out some consequences, but later on, talking to them about the feeling that you have when you're living kind of in lies and trying to cover, and how just that creates this angst in us. And we all know what that means because we've all told lies before. And this is why, we can say, we know what it causes in you because we've done this before too. And maybe even share stories of when you were caught lying as a kid or whatever.
Yeah, you've got a lot of those examples to share with our kids.
And then saying, talking to them about that feeling and then the opposite feeling of when we are truthful, when actually, and maybe even, I think we even said now that the truth has been revealed, there is a sense of relief, isn't there?
There's freedom. And that's true freedom.
Yeah.
Right. And this is a way to narrate against the, Western American value that freedom is the ability to do whatever you want.
Yeah.
No, true freedom comes by doing what is right and what is good.
Yeah.
And this is where we connect for them obedience with flourishing, obedience with happiness, and just narrate that for them. And so ultimately, I'm doing this thing here. I'm giving you this consequence here. I'm laying this boundary here ultimately for your good. And that, I think, is a vital part of this, especially at this stage.
Yeah. Okay, so to keep going through our list here, I think another part of discipline in the teen years is having the posture of wanting to help our kids, our teens, navigate decision making and starting, to give them some more freedom in that. Of course, with freedom becomes more responsibility. Like I just think about when, our kids have all gotten their driver's license. So that's a huge freedom, but it comes with big responsibility, of course. But having the posture that, we start during this stage, starting to move from just making all the decisions for them to helping them think through a decision, even if ultimately we're going to make the decision or make sure they make the right decision.
Yeah. There's some decisions you're not going to just abdicate to them.
Right. But helping them think through the decision. So I'm thinking again of another example with one of our kids where there was a decision that needed to be made. And so this child of ours was really wrestling with it. And we kind of already knew where the decision was going to go. But I encouraged them, why don't you make a pros and cons list? And I said, Dad and I have done this when we've had difficult decisions. We've literally written out on paper a list of pros and cons. And I said, this is a good way to make decisions because you can really see, you think of all the cons and all the pros and you look at that. And that was just a way to teach them to, a wise way to make decisions sometimes is to do that. And so we let them kind of engage in the decision making, even if we kind of knew where we were pushing them to.
But if, and this is where the reasonable part comes in, if the list of cons was stuff that we didn't even think through, or if they outweighed the pros, that would have shifted then our decision.
Yeah. And actually we sat down with them and went through the list with them and heard the different pros and cons and talked through it with them. So
are you using the pronoun them because that's their preferred pronouns? Or are you trying not to identify
I'm trying to
gender?
Stay gender neutral.
Okay. Yeah,
although we have boys and girls, so I could say, but anytime I say he or she, it narrows it down.
Yes, it does.
So I'm trying to stay.
Okay, I just want to make sure you're not trying to be politically correct here and giving into gender revolution.
I'm trying to make sure our kids don't hate us for doing a parent podcast and continuing to use them as examples when they maybe don't want to. So,
I think that point then leads right into the next one, and I think we got two more very practical steps here. But this second to last one is don't intervene in the natural consequences of their actions.
And we did talk about this one a little bit in the middle years, like if they forget their lunch at home over and over and over again, maybe let them miss lunch one day. So they might actually start remembering. Yeah. These sorts of things.
This is where if they tell a lie and they get caught, you and I don't intervene and let them off the hook. They need to experience the natural consequences of their own decisions. In fact, was there a part in the Proverbs that when we were looking at that earlier verse,
Proverbs 19:19, right under Proverbs 18 that we read.
Yeah, and this is just some general wisdom, but it applies to what we're saying here.
Yeah.
A man of great anger will bear the penalty. For if you rescue him, you will only have to do it again. And that's where experience and natural consequences can be a tremendous teacher, more so than me saying, hey, if you do this, this is going to be the result. And some of us just we have to learn through some of that experience. God gives us his word. He gives us the Proverbs. He gives us those, people in our lives to help guide us to avoid maybe that more painful process of learning through experience.
Yeah.
But experience can be an excellent teacher. And we got to make sure that we don't prevent our kids from maturing by protecting them from that.
Yeah. If your 16-year-old, 15-year-old gets kicked off the football team because they keep showing up to practice late, and it's not because of you, it's because of them, well, then let them get kicked off the football. I mean, this is what we're talking about because you have now as they get older, there's other people and circumstances that will discipline them. So let that happen. And, I'm thinking about this scenario of a kid keeps waking up late for practice or for school or whatever. Well, by the teen years, they should be setting their own alarm, getting their bottoms out of bed, getting ready. I mean, they are more than capable of doing this. And we're there to drive them or whatever, or maybe they're riding their bike, whatever. let them do that on their own. And if they say, "Oh, mom, can't you wake me up to get there on time?" Or, "Mom, can't you do this so I can get there? Can you remind me to?" It's like, no, because I already did high school and I passed. I made it. So now it's your turn. I already got to school at 7:30 when I was supposed to, or in my case, got there late a lot and had detention a lot. But this is what my parents didn't bail me out of detention. I was very late to school a lot, and I had to spend time in detention.
Yeah, and narrating this for them, it's not just like, no, I did this, I did it, I'm a successful adult, which I know is kind of, you're being a little facetious there, but it's saying, no, my goal here is that you mature, and part of maturity,
and take ownership too. I guess that's what I mean.
That's the part of the maturity.
I'm not trying to be, like, you're on your own, kid, but more of like, hey, this is your football team. Yeah. It's not actually mine. This is, I made it through my sophomore year. You have to do that. It's that sort of thing of like, hey, this is yours. Yeah. And if we're so controlling and still wiping their mouths and packing their lunches and doing everything for them, they don't take ownership of it. Yeah. And then,
now if there's anybody out there who's actually wiping the mouth of their high schooler,
don't you remember I'll say the kid's name this time because he didn't do anything. Micah was in 8th grade and on that flag football team. And don't you remember the horrifying story I told you? I think you weren't at that game, but he was playing flag football and one of his teammates came off the field and the mom wiped his nose for him. Which first I was like, barf, that's disgusting. I mean, I'll wipe my 3-year-old's nose, but not my 13-year-old. That's gross, But they had 2 capable hands. How did I know that? Because they were playing flag football. So they were in a sport where they're having to catch the football. And the mother wiped his nose. And I was horrified. And it wasn't like, oh, he was in a hurry, wipe it real quick. It's like he came off, he was going to be on the bench for a little while, and she came up and wiped his nose. So,
and the concern there is that, number one, you'd get snot on your own hands.
Yes.
No, the big concern there is that this would just be indicative that you're not allowing your kid to
struggle at all.
And struggle and then develop. And that this is the kind of parenting that will then try to prevent your kid from experiencing any natural consequences.
And there's so many negative things to that, but experiencing the natural consequences of if you don't wipe your nose, then snot's going to fly in your face when you're playing sports. I mean, just real practically, I don't want to talk about snot. But,
who knew this would devolve into a conversation about snot? But
this is where the natural consequences of just things happening to our kids and them learning from that. We, like I said, I think in the Middle Years podcast, sometimes it's just us getting out of the way and just letting them kind of figure things out. So we have some friends who, a big example of this, that their son got caught cheating on a test in high school. And he was the star volleyball player on the team, and he got caught cheating. And because of that, he got suspended from school for a couple days. Well, the problem was the suspension was over a volleyball game that was very important. So it
was during a volleyball.
It was like covered days where this really important volleyball game was going to happen. And he's the star player. So now he not only has let his teacher down, he's let his teammates and his coach down because he's supposed to be suspended. Now, we already know at this school that there were stories of parents going and fighting the suspension of their child who earned a suspension, and the parents fought against it and got the kid out of it. Well, these friends of ours decided, no, he needs to feel what he did. And so they really did just get out of the way and they let him do that. And so some parents had suggested to them they should just keep him home. And they said, oh no, he's going to go to the volleyball game and he's going to sit on the bench, and he's going to have to sit through what he did to his teammates. And they got pushback from other parents that basically, like, to be a good parent, you should be fighting for your kid.
Protect him from the consequences of his own actions.
And I was so stunned by the story, because it's more of a rare story now, but also just proud of them, because I can't imagine how difficult that would have been. I mean, we've had to do some difficult things with our kids, apologizing or things that have happened that our kids have had to make amends for. But this would be a very public kind of humiliating thing. And they didn't let their son out of it. He earned that public humiliation, and he needed to feel that. Yeah. And it was good for him to have to go through that. And
we know him now. And I mean, he's a mature young man.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that covers a lot of ground, a lot of practical things to do during those older years.
Yeah.
Again, putting it in that larger framework of, it's building on each level of foundation. There's stuff that will cross through the different stages. But this is where you want to move with your kids in discipline, because the ultimate goal is to send them out. And you want to send out a mature adult, as mature as you can, help develop in them. Okay, that covers, I think, a lot of the practical things that we would recommend that we've done when it comes to our kids in these older ages. And just constantly putting it back in that larger framework of the younger years, the middle years, the kind of young adult years. And you're just constantly building on this foundation. And there's lots of ups and downs. But you're moving towards, a mature kid who understands and loves discipline. They delight in, ultimately, God's laws.
Yeah, and I think to end this series of practicals, these three age groups, and just ending the practical part with reminding ourselves of what kind of our obligations are as parents, and what we just really don't have control over. And that's, our obligations as parents is to be faithful, is to work hard in knowing our kids well, in helping them to have good habits, in having good boundaries, these sorts of things. And just remembering, we will not do it perfectly. There's no perfect parent, and there's no perfect child, and there's no just all these perfect scenarios. And so just adjusting our expectations. So then that allows us to have grace, I think, and humility for ourselves when we do mess up. Yeah. We are going to mess up.
And that's connected to our theology. That's connected to our Christian worldview. For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God.
Yeah.
You, me, Erin, our kids, all of us, we are all fallen creatures. And so I think that's a good word.
And unique. And so some of our kids, we have 5, but whoever listening, no matter what number of kids you have, your kids are going to have different struggles too. Some are going to have just more struggles in being honest and speaking truth, and others are going to have a harder time in doing the right thing when everyone else isn't,
Some are going to be more relational. They're going to give in to peer pressure more easily than others. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's, so knowing who they are and knowing they're going to have struggles, they're going to have weaknesses. And so there's no just magic pill or magic anything about parenting. It is hard work. It does take a lot of prayer for God to give you wisdom. Like, this is where in James 1:5, it says, if you lack wisdom, to ask, and God, who gives generously to all men without finding fault, and it will be given to you. So this is where, as parents, we work hard, we pray hard for our kids, we ask God for wisdom, but then we ultimately know that these teen years, and then as they go out, they make the choices for their life, and we don't actually get to control them. They're not robots that we program in a thing and then this is how they're going to be. There's going to be many ups and downs in their life, just like in our life. And I just think remembering that as we parent our kids can help in the anxiety staying lower, in the fears creeping in, is just remembering the ups and downs of our own life, knowing our kids are going to have those too, and just remembering what, as parents, what our role is. And our role is not to be the Holy Spirit in their life. It's not to shape their hearts, So our job is to be faithful.
Yeah, and because there are no guarantees, this is where we as parents really have to trust in the Lord. We do our best. We continue to grow and learn. We admit our faults and our failures, and then we trust in the Lord. And this is why prayer is so vital. So in all of it, we're constantly bringing our children to God in prayer. So hopefully that is an encouragement to you, because it's just so easy as a parent to feel a sense of failure. So just be faithful and trust in the Lord.
Maven exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. To find out more, check out maventruth.com.